We are 12-14 playing 12-03 from Canada. Searman, good luck to our opponent. Let's go. E4. E4, E5. Okay, so hopefully we get a Gleck. But again, we're facing the Philidor. Now, this is becoming a very interesting trend. I didn't realize this when I started this speedrun, because the Philidor is always pretty popular with beginner to low intermediate players, but I feel like we've maybe faced knight c6 once, and we faced d6 a million times. So I wonder if it's somebody recommending this move or people just kind of, guessing into it. Pretty interesting. Now, for the umpteenth time, we have d4, we have bishop c4. Both moves are good. This time I'm going to go bishop c4 just for giggles. Bishop e7. And again, these moves are interchangeable. We can go d4 here, we can castle, but let's play principal chess and let's go d4. So at this point, I've kind of talked briefly, and I think we had a game against a slightly questionable user where I explained some of the virtues of potentially taking on d4 with the queen. One interesting subtlety is that once you have already developed your bishop to c4, at this point, in my opinion, queen takes d4 is a little bit incongruent with this move. And the reason is quite subtle. Maybe you guys can chew on this. What is the reason why queen takes d4 is less effective after you've already deployed the light squared bishop? It's not bad to take with the queen. It's just a little bit awkward. And you might have to remember in the previous speedrun how I recommended that you deal with the move knight c6. So basically the reason is after queen takes d4, okay, black will have to play knight f6. When black develops the other knight to c6, you want to have the option of playing this move bishop b5 in order to pin the knight and then eliminate the knight so that the queen remains safe in the center. But you don't want to make two moves of the same piece. Sorry to burn so much time, but that's basically the reason. When the bishop stays on f1, it can go to b5 in one move. And here you would potentially be losing a tempo. So the reason is very concrete. Let's take with the knight. Yeah, also queen takes d4, bishop f6, as Strategic points out, is a little bit annoying, just chasing away the queen straight away. So let's take with the knight. Now our knight has moved twice, that's true. But now it occupies a nice central square. Okay, knight f6, knight c3, obviously. So here I might have walked into some slightly annoying opening theory. And the moment you see a bishop on c4 like this, the tactical alarm bells should kind of be ringing. Okay, c5 is a very typical mistake at this level, but knight takes c4 always has to be properly calculated, the center fork trick, because it is pretty prevalent in a lot of Philidor lines, and it can be very easy to forget about. But our opponent plays c5. We face this type of move in a million different positions, and it's almost always a mistake, with very few exceptions, because it's just terribly weakening. It weakens this d5 square. It creates a easily targetable backward pawn on d6. And, the automatic reaction is probably to drop the knight back to f3. We don't really want to go knight f5 because that our opponent offers a draw, because that allows a trade on f5, and we grab the bishop pair, but we slightly harm our kingside pawn structure and we lessen our grip on the d5 square. But we actually have a really nice move here that's not intuitively obvious, I think. Can anybody identify it? We have a move here, and I'm giving you a big hint by saying that it's not obvious, which should guide you in the direction of non-knight moves, which really only leaves one other logical move, and that's bishop b5 check. And this is a trick that you can use in the Sicilian, as I'll show you after the game, to punish a certain set of unsound lines. The point is simple. You want to generate the f5 square for the knight, and you want to trade off the light squared bishops. Once the knight lands on f5, it simultaneously hits all of black's weak spots. Now, at this point, we can start immediately with knight f5, or we can trade on d7 first. Let's think about this. How do we want to do this? I actually think it's a good idea to immediately play knight f5. Why? Because, well, it's simple. If we take on d7, we give black a chance to develop their pieces. Here, the other knight immediately lands on b5. And you should note that I'm avoiding the tempting knight takes g7, which maybe actually is good, but too complicated. Black plays king f8, and then suddenly the knight is hanging. So here we avoid the tactics, and we simply drop the knight back to c3. And I think a lot of you are like, well, what about knight takes c4? Did I blunder this move? No. Knight takes c4 is going to go down in flames. I think our opponent is very likely to play it. In fact, knight takes c4 is losing for many different reasons. And you should kind of already start picking up on why black's position is losing. And off the top of my head, I think I see two clearly winning moves. But one move essentially just wins material by force and or devastates black's position. What am I talking about here? Yeah, very good. People all seeing queen e2, excellent job. Queen e2 found. Of course, the point is black's knight cannot move because of queen takes e7 checkmate. So black essentially has only one way to stave off immediate material loss, and that's the move d5, trying to secure the knight with the meager resources that black has, and using this pin to protect the d5 pawn. But this entire construction is about to fall apart spectacularly because black isn't even about to castle because the bishop on e7 is going to hang. So after d5, we don't even need to make a forcing move. We can just casually get out of this pin, and black's position is going to instantly collapse. And what is the easiest way of getting out of this pin? And bishop d2 is possible. I know a lot of you are probably thinking this, but there's a more elegant way to do it. You shouldn't forget that to get out of a pin does not necessarily mean to literally put a piece between it. You can actually move the piece that is getting pinned. The piece that the knight is technically getting pinned. I call this the pin piece, and the king has no name. It's like the dividend and the divisor. I wish there were terms for like the piece that's getting pinned and then the other piece. So we just castle. Long story short, we just castle. Yeah, there were other ways to win, but you actually do have to be careful. I think knight e7 is very sloppy, and I'll show you why afterward. The pin E. I think I've called it the pin E before. Yeah, the pin piece and then the pin E. Like P-I-N-E-E. Yeah, remember that in this situation, the pinned piece is the piece that actually can't move, like which is in this case the knight. Okay, g6. Now it's time for simple chess. Order of operations is very important here. Don't play knight takes d5 because then g takes f5 and suddenly the knight's defended by the other pawn. So the simplest win is just to take the bishop. Just take the bishop, king takes e7, knight takes d5 check, and then we win the knight and we win the game. And the Philidor goes down in flames. And all of it was because of c5, by the way. c5 was essentially, it shouldn't have been the losing move, but it was borderline losing in the context of like human chess. Yeah, maybe like the computer can somehow stay afloat, but black's position was already in dire straits. Okay. Let's see what our opponent does here. But checkmate is resigns. Okay. I'm going to load this into ChessBase. Short game, but I think pretty instructive. A lot of important themes. All right, and I actually do want to check the theory here because if black had played this properly, if black had castled in this position, white actually does need to be pretty accurate to secure an advantage out of the opening, and I want to double check the proper way to play. Okay, so first of all, as I said, queen takes d4 isn't a great idea because after something like knight f6 castles knight c6, you want to be able to play this move bishop b5, but now you've wasted a tempo. So that's why we took with the knight. Okay, so knight f6, knight c3, castles. Yeah, so after castles, the theory goes, castles, knight takes c4 is correct by black. A lot of games in the database here, over 100, and a lot of Grandmaster games. But white is slightly better. Knight takes c4, black plays d5. And here, of course, the standard reaction to the center fork trick, which is to preserve the bishop pair with the move bishop d3. And after d4, bishop e4, white is a very pleasant position, just more active. Pieces in the center. Black can probably equalize with very careful play, but computer is giving about 0.2. Yeah, really nice edge for white here. The main move is knight to d7, trying to get the knight to c5 or to f6. Now I like the move. I actually really like the move c3 here, which does two things. It protects the knight for future purposes, and it sets you up very nicely in the event that black plays knight c5, because here the bishop can drop back to this little nook that we've created and maintain pressure on h7. And if black plays knight e6, trying to get rid of this knight, the knight jumps again onto f5. We're following a game from 1963, where black played bishop g5, two Soviet grandmasters. And in the game, white played queen takes d8 and got an advantage in the endgame, but something like queen f3 also gives you a very nice initiative. So at any rate, c3 is sort of a key positional move. Just a moment. Yeah, and white, I think, has a slight advantage. Any questions about sort of the theory? Yeah, this is not very deep, but the bottom line is, yeah, castles, you allow the center fork trick, and if black plays a move like c6 here, you're supposed to go rook e1. And you actually allow black to play b5, which is pretty rare. But b5 is not dangerous here. The bishop drops back to d3. And if black continues to push, eventually black is going to run out of pawn moves, and black is going to be left with a ton of these light square weaknesses on the queen side. Whereas your knights are reshuffling beautifully over to the king side. And again, what is the key square on which everything revolves? It's f5. Look at how nicely you've arranged your pieces here, all kind of aiming at the king side. So at this level, when you hit like 1200, you should already be maturing in the sense that you're not just like automatically stopping everything your opponent wants to do. You're not automatically playing a4. Now black can go knight e4, and it's a better version for black. But you're, more constructively asking yourself, okay, is this idea dangerous? Can I just like allow this and react to it? Rook e1 is a very, very mature move. Like allowing b5, just saying, okay, you can attack my pieces. I want them to go to the king side anyway. Kind of an interesting thought. In any case, c5 is really, really bad. And I mentioned that this idea occurs in the Sicilian. If you were watching the candidates, you might remember that in round 1, Hikaru Nakamura playing black against Fabi played this very, very rare Sicilian variation. He played the move e5 here. And this is considered very dubious. There's a reason why Najdorf played a6, and that's to cover the b5 square. It's the same idea. You don't want to go knight f5 right away because black can just take. So you throw in this intermediate check on b5. Now, of course, Hikaru knew this, and he had prepped very deeply in a worse position. But the point is, you either trade off the light squared bishop, so bishop d7, you can play bishop takes d7, and if black takes with the knight very nicely lands on f5, and it's a very similar type of problem as black faced in the game. Now, there's a lot of theory here, but just to show you the kind of general similarity, our opponent played c5, it's exactly the same thing. And you might be like, well, didn't I say earlier that we don't want to move this bishop twice? Well, here you're serving the specific needs of the position, and the benefit extracted from moving the bishop again greatly outweighs the costs, quote unquote, of violating, an opening principle that's essentially rendered meaningless at this point. How should black have reacted? I think king f8 is actually the only move which maintains chances to defend. But here we simply drop our knight back, and yeah, black can expand a little bit on the queen side, but again, we don't really care because black's position is completely in shambles. King is weak. Pieces are undeveloped. This pawn is weak. We can attack it pretty easily. It's like plus over minus. But black made things worse with bishop d7, and now we stick the knight on f5. And everything here is pretty easy. Takes, check, we go back. Knight takes e4. And last comment I wanted to make is that, let's say you didn't see queen e2. You can actually also just castle. And you're essentially just as winning here. You're completely winning. Because, yeah, black can actually take on c3 here, and you just recapture. And this knight on f5 is the game-winning piece. There's nothing that black can do. You're going to start massacring them down the e-file. Like, your next move is basically rook e1 against everything. Knight c6, rook e1, g7 is hanging, the bishop is coming out, queen takes d6 is a threat. You get the point. It's important to understand how moves like castles kingside can win the game very effectively. But we went with a concrete move, queen e2. And here, same thing, just castles. Black is totally and completely helpless. Pismos asks, instead of knight takes b5, could I have taken on g7? So I pointed this out during the game. I think I could have, but I didn't want to calculate. I feel like this is too complicated. King f8 is what worried me. But you're right. You can go bishop h6, and you set up the threat of a discovery against black's queen. But black has this move queen d7, and suddenly you can't win the queen anymore. And even though the engine says white is winning, you have to sacrifice a piece. And why is this necessary when there exists a perfectly simple alternative that keeps the advantage? All right, so try to be practical. All right. And let's do a 5-minute game. This isn't going to be too long of an episode. It's late. But let's do this. 5-minute game, 1672 from Turkey. And potentially a King's Indian. Let's go. Okay, so knight c3. We're facing essentially a version of the Jababa London. And if you are a King's Indian player, you should be very vigilant about a knight landing on c3 before white has played c4, which is an attempt to move order you into the perk, which presumably you don't play. If you do play the perk, you can go bishop g7 here and allow white to play e4. If you don't, you need to play d5. And traditionally, these setups with knight c3 were considered dubious, if not outright bad, because as I've explained many times in d4 openings, traditionally you want to maintain the possibility of pushing the c4 pawn, the c pawn to c4, in order to pressure the black pawn on d5. Like the knight here is considered very awkward. But recently, that has changed. Jababa London has gotten popular, but e3 is just bad. Blocks in the bishop. This is a very unambitious setup by white, and we can just continue with simple development, continuing our development. And at this point, I think I've played enough of these structures to where if you've watched diligently, you should have a pretty good instinct about how black should play in this position. So ask yourself, like, what is your instinct here for black? Maybe some of you are thinking bishop g4, but a lot of you have been paying attention really should be angling to play this move c5. And the point is you're never really concerned about dc for many reasons. I didn't even calculate this move, but the fact of the matter is this pawn is very easy to win back when white has such a passive structure, and there's usually several ways to do it. And a very nice way to do it, which also lays a pretty cunning trap, is to play knight b to d7. Now, previously, you've probably seen me go knight a6, but here that's less effective because that knight can be captured. Okay, knight a4, white is trying to cling to the pawn. But as we know, what often happens when white tries to cling to the pawn is that white compromises other aspects of their position. We can play queen a5 here, by the way, and win the pawn back directly. But I'm going to play a more flexible move, queen c7. I'm going to encourage white to play b4, which they do. And now white's already in pretty big trouble. But let me think about this for just a second. How do we want to exploit it? I can sense that white is in trouble, but we need to be accurate in our punishment. Okay, so let's start with this pretty standard response, which is to go a5 and try to induce further weaknesses on the queen side. White plays c3, excellent. And now it's showtime. Let's play a takes b4, opening up the diagonal. Now we've opened up another pressure point on this a4 knight, which we should keep in mind as we try to generate tactics in this position. Lots of interesting moves that we could play with black. This is really a wide open position. I think a lot of good options. I like the move knight g4. So essentially, I'm combining two different attacking points. This knight on a4 is under serious pressure, which ties down the queen. And now I want to develop an attack on the h2 pawn. What's stopping me from doing that? Well, of course, it's the knight on f3. Can we remove that knight while preserving the general skeleton of our attack? Yes, we can. We can go knight e5 and dd5. We can also have gone pawn e5. Yeah, true. h3 and white immediately blunders mate, but the situation was dire. And I think white just forgot that the h2 is now unprotected. Moving a pawn out of a square does not make the square itself protected. That's sometimes a blind spot for players. And another short one, another miniature. Okay, so in terms of theory, there isn't much to say. e3 is just a bad move. Bishop f4 transposes into the Jabava London. Black plays bishop g7, and maybe some of you have seen me play this with both colors in regular blitz, like white has this knight b5 idea. I won't delve into the theory right now. It's not the time. I'm sure we'll probably face it. But e3 is unambitious. So already white is quite a bit worse, I think, after c5. dc5, yeah, knight b to d7. And the big point here is that if white goes b4, this is the trap. Black essentially wins the game and wins a ton of material by playing knight e4. And everything collapses. If white plays knight takes e4, black patiently recaptures, hitting 3 pieces at once. White loses at least a piece. If white takes with the bishop, now who can tell me which piece do you take? Do you take the bishop or do you take the knight? Simple but important question, because this situation occurs pretty often. Yeah, you take the knight, because here you're hitting the rook, you're hitting the bishop. No way to defend both. You don't do this because of knight to d4 intercepting the bishop. And some people will be like, well, what about e5? But now your bishop is blocked off, so you're not winning the knight. So b4 doesn't work. And if white can't play b4, then white has a hard time keeping this pawn. So here we go queen c7. Now white plays b4. So we start with a5, softening up the structure on the queen side. And now we open up a second front with the move knight to g4. Now, I allow for the possibility that this might be unsound, and maybe the engine can find some defensive resources for white. Maybe white is better. But this is a 5-minute game, so I'm trying to illustrate the general concepts here. I'm not suggesting that my execution is accurate. In fact, looking at the engine now, and engine is giving a big advantage for white. After knight e5, queen e5, which I saw, I thought that g3 is essentially forced, and now black is winning with a beautiful sequence. You start with queen h5, super typical concept. And after h4, very instructive series of moves. Very instructive series of moves. Now, this is really hard, but I'll give people a chance to think about this. because the standard way of playing in this type of situation doesn't really apply here. Because a lot of you might have a pattern kind of recognition moment where you're like, well, I know how to break down this structure, but it's actually not what you might think it is. So when I say this is the standard way of breaking down the structure, and what am I referring to? Let me pull up a sample game. Voila. So 2 Soviet players. It's black to play in this position, and here you should be able to see the similarity. Let's flip the board. Black plays queen h5. And after h4, black plays the very thematic g5. And this is the textbook way to do it. Now, in this case, white can't take with the knight because the knight is pinned, and obviously you're trying to break down the h file. And ultimately, this leads to white giving up an exchange, and black wins the game. Okay, but in the case of our speedrun game, it's actually not g5 that you're supposed to play. And you're like, well, why not? Well, g5, white can play f3, and you're just not in time to break down the door. You actually are supposed to take the knight, deflecting the queen, and now work around the light squares with this retreating knight move, knight e5. Really lovely, lovely concept. And you're just crushing black, crushing white on the light squares. You're also hitting the bishop. So let's say the bishop moves, and now simply check. Okay, let's say king moves up, check. Knight takes h4, another beautiful sack. Knight g takes h4. The king is just all alone here. And now look at this. Boom, another sacrifice. Not the only mating sequence, but the most beautiful one. Check, back, check, mate. Ridiculous. Yeah. Of course, you can win probably much more simply by playing a move like queen g4. But this is a pretty lovely sequence. And the dark squared bishop suddenly comes into the play. The one piece you thought, well, this probably doesn't participate in any way. This is the beauty of the King's Indian. It's such a dynamic opening. Every piece might have its moment in the sun. The problem is, I somehow very much underestimated the other way to defend against checkmate, which is f4. And after this move, white is better. Because now if black plays queen h5, white simply goes h3. And the worst thing for black is to allow a queen trade, because white is up a pawn and white does have the b6 square. After f4, black has to go queen e6. And white protects the pawn with rook f3, and white is actually better. But I think you've kind of gotten the point. Where did I go wrong? According to the computer, I went wrong actually with the move queen c7. It was a lazy move, and the best move here was to play knight e4. With the same idea, except white is unable to play b4. And if white takes the knight, you should already know that this is a very favorable type of situation. The pawn clamps down, knight d4, and now black plays queen c7, and everything is hunky-dory. But yeah, c5, very thematic move, very powerful, and should be your instinct in a lot of these situations. Any questions? Okay, one more 5-minute game. Let's do this. We have black again, Tom Pulovich, 1680, we're over 1700. Facing some stalwart opposition and a London system, which we've definitely already faced several times before, and my recommendation here is c5. Whoa. So c4, clearly either a mouse slip or our opponent was expecting us to play, g6 or e6, but this is, in either case, would be a weird way to combine two openings that don't normally combine. c4 is obviously bad because of cd, and white's actually in big trouble already. Now here, your hand should be playing the move, knight c6, no comment. But now, as a matter of fact, we can try to win this game quickly. Now, a lot of people here, what would be their instinct? Well, they would think about a move like e6 or maybe g6, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we can actually play for a lot more by throwing caution to the wind and prioritizing super quick development. How do I know that this is a good strategy? Because if we can land a bishop on b4 with a check, our knight on f6 is ready to spring into action with a move like knight e4, adding heat to that pin. And so you should kind of sense that, well, this is potentially promising. We have the move e5, exploiting this bishop. Perfect, bishop g3, another mistake. Now we get this bishop out with a check. And now we start piling on the heat, one piece after another. But we want to do it smartly, right? We want to do it in the right order. And there's probably a lot of different good orders here and a lot of good moves. Yeah, definitely more than one good approach in this position. I have no doubt about that. You can start with queen a5. You can start with knight e4. I think both of these moves are excellent. But I like queen a5. It's more flexible. Because in addition to knight e4, you have a less obvious way of trying to involve this knight. Does anybody see it? I'm not saying we're necessarily going to play it, but you should at least be aware of this concept. yeah, you can play d5 because this checks off another box. Oh, it opens the center, and after cd knight takes d5, the knight plays the same role that it does on e4. We are threatening to take twice on c3, winning the rook. White is helpless. Yeah. Rook c1. Queen takes a2, by the way, is an excellent move. Kudos if you spotted this little zinger. As a matter of fact, it might be one of black's best moves because it just wins a bunch of pieces, pawns. But I actually really am partial to d5 here. I think the fastest way to victory is actually, yeah, to open up the center with d5. Just getting everything, throwing the kitchen sink at white, essentially. Okay, e3. White is just woefully incapable of dealing with this onslaught. And just d4, picking up this knight. Not cleanly because white is a3, but we'll deal with that if white plays it. Okay, knight e2. White is, I think, just collapsing here. Just dc. Banking the extra piece, but we're not going to stop there. That's just the tip of the iceberg, actually. But before we do anything else, I think it's a good idea to get our king out of the center. The simplest move is just to castle. And it plays into our general plan because now we can quickly put a rook on the open file. Just an automatic move. I'm not calculating anything right now. I'm just making clearly obvious and clearly good moves, like rook d8. How bad can that be? Actually, white's queen is trapped, potentially. Totally crushing. And all the pieces are coming out with tempo. That's just what happens when you have this huge lead in development. It's all of the pieces are naturally coming out to the right squares. Bishop f5, hitting the queen again. Notice the role played by the black queen now as a defender of the bishop. Flexibility in your thinking, right? You shouldn't think of the queen on a5. Okay, it fulfills one role. The queen is doing many different things. And yeah, that's it. And now the clincher. Which move traps the queen? Knight d4. Essentially traps the queen. White has queen d1, but then we can win the queen. Okay. Now, what's the most kind of academic way of winning the queen? Well, you have knight f3, but then you're giving up a piece and a rook. Right? Is there a way to not give up so many pieces for the queen? Well, if you want to play the most sort of pedantic move, it's actually, okay, there's many ways to, but I don't want to dwell on this, but it's actually knight takes e2. Yeah, it's knight takes e2. Delayed gratification, right? The queen will come, but after queen takes e2, now you have this pin and you're only giving away a rook for the queen, essentially. If white castles here. Yeah, bishop e5. Okay, thank you for that. And white's losing everything here. Yeah, so these little zingers can be a good addition to your play. It doesn't matter here, but you know, these points that I make obviously are intended to be applicable to more combative positions. Here we're winning with anything. Even knight f3 is plainly winning because we're already up a piece. Yeah, so today's episode is all about the short games. This one, once again, over straight out of the opening. c4 is really bad. And after e5, white is in dire straits. And in order to keep anything resembling a feasible position, white just has to like curl up into a ball and play this ridiculously ugly move, bishop d2. After bishop g3, the game is essentially over. Black is totally winning on move 6. Yeah, knight c3, queen a5. There's not much to say here. Rook c1, d5, and the game is over. The only comment I wanted to make is after e3, d4, what would we have done in response to a3? Well, what do you think is black's best move? And again, you're looking for something that doesn't require tons of calculation, but that wins cleanly. The best of all worlds. What does that move look like? Not bishop takes a3. That's not the best. See, the problem with a move like bishop takes a3 is that you're shortchanging yourself because white's going to take on a3, and then white's going to blockade this pawn, and suddenly it's like, wait a second. Yeah, I've won a couple pawns, but, you know, the game continues. White's probably going to pick up this pawn. So what you need to realize is this is what I would call a double pin. When you have a pair of pieces that are stacked like this on a pinned piece, you have the luxury of falling back with one of the pieces and maintaining the pin of the other. Okay, so the best move here is actually just bishop e7, just dropping the bishop back. And you might be like, well, what about b4? Well, after b4, now the a3 pawn falls, and the b4 pawn is going to fall with check, and the bishop is going to re-enter the fray with devastating effect. Here, you're going to play bishop takes b4 check, and the cherry on top is that after king e2, the other bishop comes out with check, and if white blocks with a pawn, then queen takes e3 is mate. If white plays knight f3, among other things, you can give a little deflection check, pick up this rook, and you're threatening a beautiful mate on e1 using the other pin. Just another idea to add to your collection. This trade doesn't change anything. Now, white gave up the piece and the game was over after that. But same thing would have applied here. Yeah, a3, bishop e7. And at the very least, you're going to win a piece with a huge initiative. All right, well, today's Blitz Day. You guys have been a great crowd today. One more encore before I hit the sack. One more 5-minute game. Yeah, a lot of Blitz games today. I know that's not to everyone's liking, but hopefully you found this mildly instructive. And we're facing a Caro. So I've made several recommendations against the Caro, but I think the crowd favorite is the fantasy. Let's see if we can play a nice tactical fantasy game to finish off this episode. Okay, e6, knight c3. This is theory. Bishop e7 is already a second-rate move. It's not a terrible move, but in order to keep chances of equality, black needs to develop the bishop to b4 more aggressively. Bishop e7 already slides into a very passive position and allows us to develop our pieces nicely and harmoniously. So if you play the fantasy, you should kind of have a good roadmap of where your pieces are essentially going so that they don't stumble over each other. You also have to remember that the d4 pawn can often be sacrificed in many situations for a big development advantage, which is why we start with bishop to d3. And we are not fearing d takes e4 because we actually can pick up, recapture the pawn. Offering up the d4 pawn, yes, but gaining a huge lead in development, which starts off with knight f3. Now, typically in this situation, you'd have, like in the French, you'd have a discover check on b5. Here, of course, you don't have that because there's a pawn on c6. Now we just continue with castles, revealing one of the main advantages of the fantasy, which is that you get this semi-open f file, which allows you to supercharge your attack. But how would you proceed in this position? Here we have a very important move, without which it's hard to gather the necessary supplies for the attack. And that move is e5. Multi-purpose move. You're completely halting black's queenside development. You're creating this typical clamp. And the follow-up is also very standard. You now put the knight on e4, reinforcing our total control over all the key business squares. And now the avalanche is coming once again. Castles and probably many roads lead to Rome, and in this case, many roads lead to us gaining black's king's head. But again, our instinct should be to attack simply. There shouldn't be, you shouldn't start off by saying, okay, let's bishop h6 or knight d6. Is there a more straightforward way to involve pieces in the attack? What does that mean? Well, the queen clearly desires to be on the h5 square. I mean, that should be pretty obvious to you as an instinct. And so let's just go knight fg5. One of the most common attacking moves in any position. I'm just setting up queen h5. And that's it. The game is over. It's black has zero defensive firepower on the king side. Now we should keep an eye out for a sudden, like queen b6 check, but none of that does anything. We always have king h1. And here we can probably do this sacrificially if we wanted to with a move like knight f6. And actually, do we want to? Yeah, we kind of do. Let's do it. Knight f6 check. Let's end this in style. Yeah, this is another very thematic type of operation, let's say. Well, first, the knight is sacrificed. Just a second. First, the knight is sacrificed. Then we take on h7. And then the final step is to set up an unstoppable discovery mate with queen h5. Okay, I can't pre-move, but you get the point. Just queen h5. Black can only stave it off with a check on d4, which I assume our opponent is going to play. King slides over, and black's king is checkmated 7 ways to Sunday. Yeah, this is over. Okay. Now there's a little subtlety here that we might have to show. I think bishop takes g5 might actually be the most resilient, quote unquote. And we could even just recapture on g5 if we wanted to. Let's see what our opponent does. Queen d4 check. Okay, that's kind of what I expected initially. King h1. And the game is over. Bishop g5. Yeah, so again, you can go bishop d3, but black can block with a bishop h6. So the clinical way here is to actually just recapture. There's no rush. So eliminate all the obstacles, and now finally the discovery is going to lead to quick checkmate. And black's queen side is totally undeveloped to end the game, which is the most telling symbol of how hard it can be to play the fantasy with black if you're not totally sure of what you're doing. This is why it's such a powerful weapon. Like, no other opening against the Caro-Kann can win you a game this fast against seemingly, fairly standard developing moves. Not like black is doing anything super outlandish, but 10 moves in, the game is won. Now the trade-off is, the fantasy is a very narrow opening. If black studies it well, black is going to get a good position. So it's not theoretically challenging against like a GM, but it can be actually. Yeah, bishop takes G. Okay, bishop f6 is mate in 1 actually, but it doesn't matter. H7. Let's mate thematically. Yeah, of course, bishop f6 was insta-mate. And again, another miniature. Today was a day of miniatures. So the problems for black started with bishop e7. I actually don't remember if we faced bishop b4 before, but here the move is actually a3. At least my preferred move is to play a3. And the one thing to point out here is that after, just a moment, put this in. After black plays bishop c3, bc, and de, here you just have to remember not to recapture on e4 because this allows the nasty check on h4. The move is actually knight to h3, and this is very hard to come up with if you don't remember it. Knight h3, basically saying, okay, take me. And again, white gets this massive like avalanche on the king side. Black has this dud of a bishop. This is a very fun position to play. Again, won't delve into the theory too much at these early stages. Bishop e7 is pretty dubious. We played bishop d3. And now the real problems start for black, who should have played a move like knight d7 or knight f6 and kept the center closed, but instead our opponent got greedy and gave us this huge lead in development after castles. But according to the computer, see, again, this is why ultimately in the speedrun I play a longer time control, because it helps me not be sloppy. Castles is actually sloppy and allows an unexpected defensive resource. I was supposed to play e5 right away. Who can tell me why? Who can tell me why? Why is castles wrong? Very advanced concept. This is why chess is so hard. You're operating based on total sound logic, and you just get a little bit unlucky tactically. Yeah, so Scorpion King got it. E5. Black plays e5. No, not h6 or f6, because then white's still going to go e5. Black's resource here is e5. The pawn is untouchable. That's the point, because the queen returns to d4 and picks up the knight. And once this move is made, black can breathe. So let's say white plays king h1, right, reinforcing the threat. Well, now the problem is it's much harder to get the attack started because this bishop is out of the game. So in the same situation we had in the game, black's king is going to be much, much safer on the king side. White can get the queen over to g3, and it's still very much a game. White can win back the pawn, but amazingly in this position, white has to do it with a queen. More unluck, because if white takes with the knight, black has a winning move, knight h5, and suddenly the queen and the knight lose contact, and black wins a full piece. So white unfortunately has to go for the queen trade, which black is more than happy to accept, and it's equal. So I completely missed e5. This move did not occur to me at all, and it's a hard move. But once black didn't play it, the rest is just very, very simple attacking chess. Knight g5. And this is such kind of a standard way of attacking that I could probably find a game where these exact moves were featured in this exact order, and the game ended in exactly the same way. In fact, here it is. This is a random game from 2012, 1700 versus 1600. I don't even know the opening. The opening was some weird bird system. And watch this. Knight g5, black played f6, knight takes f6, exactly the same set of moves. Except here, black plays bishop takes g5, and there's an instructive component to this. What is white's best move here? Actually, I don't know the answer. But what would you do? Let's check the engine. Because white played, I think, a very sloppy move here. White played a very sloppy move. Yes, I'm correct. White makes a huge mistake. Bishop g6 check, allowing the bishop to block with bishop h6. Now, white had foreseen this and prepared f5. But here, black has a very powerful defensive resource, which was missed in the game. Black played knight e5, and after bishop h6, white is again winning. And white could have avoided all of this by simply recapturing the bishop. Same situation as in the game. What was the defensive resource? It was rook takes f5, giving up the exchange, but eliminating this bishop. And after white takes it, this does not come with the same effect. White runs out of pieces. And at best, you can maybe get a perpetual here. So that's basically the reason why I need to be patient here. But as you can see, pretty standard attacking chess here with knight g5 and knight f6 being a nice little idea. Yeah, bishop f6, bishop h7, queen h5. And the rest was pretty obvious. Let's see, any questions? If black had played gf6 here, we can actually go queen h5 right away. Very important. Do not automatically play bishop h7 because here the king can step up to g7 and suddenly these pieces are very awkwardly placed. So here the move is queen h5 and it's checkmate because two different minor pieces are supporting the queen in hitting h7. Black can only take one of them at the same time. Yeah. The last thing is bishop takes g5 here. Some of you pointed out that after bishop takes g5, black can technically stave off the checkmate with queen takes, but in this situation, we can pick up the knight. We can probably checkmate black with rook f3. We can do a million different things. Like this prolongs the game by a couple moves. And that's all I have for you today, guys. It's really late. I'm going to go to sleep. Got a bit busy day tomorrow. But thanks for watching this episode. Hope you enjoyed Blitz-themed speedrun today, and hope you enjoyed the stream overall. Thanks, everybody.